how the story goes. It's ancient Greece. There are some famous playwrights floating around, you know, Aeschylus and Sophocles and the like, the big names. They were all good and fun, performing in big arenas, writing plays, clad in platforms and masks, praising the god of the vine, Dionysus. Now, cut out the plays and the big arenas, Dionysus. Take your mask and meet me in the 1600s. Italy, home of the pasta. Welcome to Commedia dell'arte. Wearing masks, street performers doing scenario plays as stock characters like Pantalone, the perverted old man, or Arlequino, the lower-class trickster. These troupes traveled around, improvising between the lines of their scenarios. Their improvisational techniques traveled even further, up to England, emerging in the 1800s as theater sports. These theater sports used improvisation and competition to make fast-paced performance that was, again, like Commedia dell'arte, not entirely scripted, but followed some sort of structure. In the early 1900s, as swarms of European immigrants flooded the United States, they brought with them these fresh theatrical ideas. Around 1920, Viola Spolin of Chicago, Illinois, took these ideas and started investigating them. She taught theater games to her children's theater company, establishing in the United States the first instance of theatrical improvisation. Cut to the 1950s and meet the Compass Players. David Shepard and Paul Sills met at the University of Chicago and created the Compass Players, a company based in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago that offered theater for the working class man. The Compass Players were comprised of actors, directors, and writers from the University of Chicago and performed a different show of scenario plays and improvised sketches every week to packed houses. Now, why did improv start at the University of Chicago? 1950s America was swarming with McCarthyism, anti-communism, conservatism, people being forced into the mold of the ideal American dream, by the general fear of atomic bombs and big government. Mosey on down to the University of Chicago, defying the fear of the time by operating according to philosophies of learning that were as liberal can be. They let in anyone who could pass their entrance exam. So the Compass Players played at a super small venue. Actors served food as waiters to their audience on their off nights, and the bar next door supplied the booze. One player would write an about 4-page scenario play, and the rest of the company would improvise between the plot points. At the end of their show, they would take one or more suggestions and improvise sketches. They were a smash hit, doing theater that appealed to the proletariat in a venue that was intimate and fun. They tried to bring Compass to Broadway, but everything fell apart. It wasn't the right fit. There was something to that close-knit feel, inexpensive ticket cost, and there was something about Chicago that appealed to the working man the way it didn't in the Broadway audience. In 1959, Compass died, but from it emerged The Committee in San Francisco and The Second City in Chicago. The Second City commercialized improv. This company used improv as a technique to formulate written reviews, a method the theater still uses today. They popped out major stars like Gilda Radner, John Belushi, and Dan Aykroyd, and others. Two Second City alum, Del Close and Sharna Halpern, were not satisfied with Second City's treatment of improv as just another tool in the box. In the 1980s, they broke off from the Second City and started their own theater. The Improv Olympic, or I.O. as it is known today, was formed as a theater for improv for the sake of improv. Here emerged The Herald. The Herald was a long-form improv technique created by Dell through experimentation with actors, a way to utilize a structure that wasn't necessarily as set as scenarios, but allowed for improvisers to create on the same wavelength. So the structure was set. However, then the content came into question. There were a lot of rules. America was embracing the individual comic voice as the 1980s conservative commercialization of comedy started to fail and improvisers started to question all the rules of the game. Improv was very much a white male-dominated form. Women and non-white races were often degraded in improvised scenes under the guise that improv was all made up and the marginalization was just part of the game. Students of Dell took his idea and branched out, forming theaters around Chicago like The Annoyance and in New York City like the Upright Citizens Brigade, taking his base structure of the Herald and finding ways to play with it, figuring out different ways to learn more about improv itself. Many of the theaters, such as the I.O. and the Upright Citizens Brigade, have since created locations in Los Angeles, California. Today, you can watch improv on television in shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway? And you can still see it in all of the theaters that made it what it is today.